Hello, I'm Dan Ware. Welcome to Frankly Franklin. As you watch this program, we have just finished the annual observance of Veterans Day, and looking ahead to upcoming holidays, the small town Christmas celebration in Franklin this year will have as its theme a World War II Christmas, or Christmas during the war years. So in the time between Veterans Day and the small town Christmas on December the 5th, I and some of our other hosts on Frankly Franklin will be interviewing some of our Simpson County World War II veterans. To begin that, I have with me today Dr. George Freas, a local veterinarian, now retired, well known to many of us. And Dr. Freas served his country during World War II. He was in the Air Force, and his plane was shot down, and he spent some time as a prisoner of war in a German prison camp. So I've asked him to come in and reminisce about that time with us a little bit today. Dr. Freas, welcome.
Thank you.
We're talking about things that are going to be talking about things that took place 54, 55 years ago.
Yeah.
Does it seem long ago and far away, or is it still fresh in your memory?
Well, I don't dwell on the past too much, Dan, but, you know, it really doesn't seem to be that much time should have lapsed since then.
Well, I've noticed as I get older, they do seem to go faster.
Oh, yeah.
Well, now, you were a young man, I'm sure. How old were you when you went into the service?
21.
21, okay. Where were you living at the time?
I was living with my parents out North Simpson County, well, just south of the Warren County line, actually.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, were you drafted, or did you enlist, or?
Well, I enlisted. I had taken the aviation cadet examination and having successfully passed it, I had the opportunity to come home and wait until my appointment came through, or I could go on in the. And by the way, it was the U.S. Army Air Corps.
Oh, okay, not the Air Force. I'm sorry. Okay.
But anyway, so I chose to make the break and go in and get do basic training or recruit training, and make that break away from home. Although I was 21, I'd never really been away from home.
Is that right? Yeah. Had you ever been overseas before, or?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Where did you do your training?
Well, I did basic at Keeslerfield, Mississippi during those hot and humid days of July, August, and September of.
Well, that'd toughen a fella up.
42. But then on September the 15th, my appointment as a cadet came through, and then I went on the West Coast. Actually, Santa Ana was the where they had the classification, and having been chosen to do pilot training, I also did the pre-flight training there. Then I went to Tulare, California, up in the San Joaquin Valley for primary flight training. Went up the valley a little further to Merced, did basic flight training, and then I went to Douglas, Arizona, then on the Mexican border, and did advanced training in twin engines.
Okay. So you had a fairly lengthy training period before you went overseas.
Well, I was my class was 43G, which means, and I completed the flight training on July the 27th in 1943. And then I went to Moses Lake, Washington, where I was assigned a combat crew as co-pilot, and we flew some there, and then we went to Harvard, Nebraska, which is out just close to Hastings, and that's where the group was being formed to go overseas as a complete unit.
I see.
And it was the 447th Bomb Group, and I was assigned the 711th Bomb Squadron. Okay. So we had a lot of 7s and 11s in there, but I don't know whether it helped out or not.
Well, that's an interesting take on that. So how many people then in a
crew?
Group? Yeah, in a crew.
There were 10. they were 4 officers, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier.
Okay.
And then there were 6 enlisted men, all sergeant ranks. And in addition to being gunners, primarily they were gunners, but they also held other positions such as the mechanic, armament, and one of them strictly, all he did was radio operator.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't man any machine guns, but the other 6, plus the navigator and bombardier, also had weapons to help stave off at least aerial attacks.
Now this was a B-17.
Yes, I went. It may be. I went overseas with a complete. It was a complete new airplane, but also it was a new version of the B-17 called the B-17G. Basically, and it was an improvement. Basically, it had a nose turret in it rather than just the flexible machine guns.
I've got a picture that you brought in of that plane, and I'm going to see if I can hold that up and see if you can see that on camera. And it says B-17G Flying Fortress. Why the nickname Flying Fortress? Because of all the gun positions, or?
Yes, it was a very, very stable airplane, and it took a lot to knock it out of the sky.
Now, you showed me this photograph of the plane that you trained on.
Yeah.
If we can get a shot of that.
That's my favorite.
And but now looking at this plane right here and looking at that B-17, there's a world of difference there.
Yeah, but each stage of training, you go up the ladder a little bit, and basically, I flew a B-13, which was a Vol T. That was this Stearman, for example, had a 25 horsepower engine, had a top speed a little over 200, and then when you went from that up to the BT-13, it had a 450 horsepower engine, and it had flaps and it had a canopy. That basically, the Stearman, the only communication, it was an open cockpit type thing, and you actually talk through a tube with a funnel on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It
was a very simple airplane, but a very stable airplane. And as I mentioned to you before, it was a great flying airplane. It was a little problems to land, particularly in a crosswind.
Well, once you got on the B-17 now, and your crew went to England for bombing raids on the continent,
Right.
leaving from England, and this was in late '43.
We left the States, Bangor, Maine, and in mid-November, and we ran in. The weather was getting bad at that time of year, similar to what we have now. But anyway, we flew to Gander, Newfoundland, and we finally got off, and we flew the northern route to Ireland, but we were the last combat group to make that flight that year, because even one crew that failed to get off, they had to go the southern route down through South America, over North Africa, and back here, and they didn't get to England until mid-January.
I see. But I guess you already had missions under your belt by that point, didn't you?
We started flying missions. Actually, or the group flew missions. I didn't actually fly the first mission on December the 24th.
Okay. But now you flew several successful missions and returned before you were shot down, right?
Yeah, I'd completed 15.
15. Now, the training that you'd had stateside, did that prepare you for combat when you're encountering enemy fire, or is there any way to really be prepared for that the first time?
Well, it's a little difficult to be ready for anything. And actually, the type of formation that we flew in the States, which was a kind of a tight formation where you, as the old saying, you try to stick your wingtip in their waist gunner hole in the fuselage, but it was in different entirely different ball game in combat because we flew a stat formation. In other words, we had 21 airplanes in a formation in a group.
Right.
And we had 4 groups making up a wing.
Okay.
And our theory was that you were supposed to maintain 50 feet between planes, both vertically and horizontal. Consequently, it was we as pilots, we didn't call ourselves pilots. We called ourselves airplane jockeys because we, in order to maintain that type of a formation, you were constantly on the, unless you were one of the lead planes, you were constantly on the throttles to try to maintain. And that was for, the reason was to, first of all, to increase the firepower of all the guns on the 21 airplanes or so. The other thing was it decreased the chance of being encountering enemy fire, being shot at by hit by your own other members, and it also, in case that a plane got hit, it wasn't as likely to bump into another plane. They'd have more room.
Okay.
But it was difficult. It was just plain hard work.
Once you got to the target, did you all separate a little bit? Did everybody have essentially the same target, or if a town is a target, each squadron has a little different specific target, or how did that work?
I don't remember of ever having as a target a specific town. It was a certain building or communication within that town.
Right.
However, to answer your question, that on some of the missions, a few of the missions, particularly the ones that we flew just in the Pas-de-Calais area of France, across the Channel, where the Germans were building rocket sites to launch the V-1, V-2 buzz bombs. So, but at the time, we the pilots didn't know exactly. I mean, they didn't tell us what they were. They just called them no-ball targets. And on those, we bombed sometimes in flights of 3, sometimes in single aircraft. And another thing that was unique about that is that we, at least in the beginning, we went in at what we call low altitude, somewhere from 8,000 to 12,000 feet. But then the Germans got wise and moved in those versatile 88s they had. I'm referring to any aircraft or they could also use them on ground level too.
So you had to go to a higher
But
altitude.
at that altitude, I mean, they were extremely deadly. They're accurate, and it sounded like when one of them came up through the formation, it sounded like a freight train done. And if you got a hit, you got knocked out of the sky.
Well, in those first 15 missions where you got back safely, were your plane ever hit and had to kind of limp back, or did you all escape that until you were shot down?
We had 2 close encounters, I guess you'd call it. One occurred on January the 30th in 1944 on a bombing mission to Augsburg, Germany. And it was due to weather conditions. I'm sure that most anyone that's looked up in the sky on certain days have seen what we refer to as contrails, actually vapor trails. You can't see the airplane, but you see where they've been or where they're going. Well, we were supposed to bomb at 26,000 feet, but every time a group would go, and we were bombing in groups on this particular mission, every time a group went over the target, they would leave that layer of contrail, which was the same as clouds.
Mm-hmm.
And each succeeding group had to make an effort to get above them.
Mm-hmm.
Consequently, we started on the bomb one at 27,000 feet. We came out at 31,000 feet, which was considered the maximum ceiling on a B-17, and it was real mushy. You hardly had control. A lot of planes actually stalled out
at that high an altitude.
Some of them were dropping their bombs through other planes. It was a fiasco. And to cap it off, just as the bombardier dropped his bombs, of course he was dropping on a lead plane. Both the bombardier and navigator got hit by flak.
Okay. Well, tell me now about that 16th mission, the one that you didn't make it back from.
Well, we had flown 3 missions. Well, actually, there were 5 missions to Berlin. 2 of them had been recalled, but I had flown 3 missions, and it was the most fortified place in Germany because Hitler had vowed that no enemy airplanes would ever reach it. And not only was it fortified with anti-aircraft guns, but they threw up everything that would fly, including night fighters, Stuka bombers, but we survived those missions. And as you walked into the briefing room or the war room, they had this big, well, one wall was covered with a map of Western Europe, and they always had a curtain over it, So when they dropped the curtain and this arrow or streamer was going to Augsburg instead of Berlin, everybody gave a collective sigh of relief, But without going into a long story, we had since in that January the 30th mission, in addition to the 2 wounded, we also had damage to the aircraft and had to crash land it. That was the original plane that we'd flown overseas. It was named the Squirmin' Squall. But and since then we had been flying what they call spare planes, anything, and some of them had been damaged. In missions, and they've been used for spare parts and different things. But anyway, the day before, on the 15th of March, they had delivered this new B-17, and it wasn't painted. It was completely, well, it was aluminum, but it looked silver, After checking out 2 planes that we were assigned to fly, and each of them had mechanical problems. We asked permission to fly the new airplane,
Right.
and only one person could give that permission. That was the old man himself, Colonel Hunter Harris, that was the group commander. And he said we could fly it under one condition, that we flew in the lead plane behind the lead flight. In other words, the safest place you would think, at least from fighter planes now, as far as flight's concerned, it would just take you potluck,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
But anyway, we were flying in that position, and as we were approaching the German border, I noticed up to my right and much higher than that, I'd say, using the term that we used back in those days, probably 1 o'clock high, that they were, I didn't see the planes, but I saw these telltale contrails that they were leaving. So I notified the group, and by the way, we were the lead group in the 8th Air Force on that particular day, so we were way out front. And it was just a matter of a few minutes till they would fly up in the sun where they could come at you and make it difficult to to see.
You're looking into the sun
right.
to try to pick them out.
And they would come through in not just single planes, but in mass. And it seemed like that every one of them had their sights on that silver airplane, but there were 8 or 10 of them that
these were German fighter planes.
They were German fighters that veered off before they, actually got within firing range. Well, they were firing, but but this one pilot, I don't know whether he was extremely brave or a stupid one, but he just kept coming. He came in so close you could see the color of his eyes.
Really, that close?
And I thought he was going to ram us. Although German pilots weren't. I never knew of one ramming an airplane. But
they weren't into
kamikaze not like the Japanese. Right. But anyway, he hit us right in the midsection, right in the nose of the airplane, and the right inboard engine, the one closest to the fuselage.
Mm-hmm.
He knocked the engine completely off the mount, and the bombardier was hit and killed. The shrapnel came up through the nose and hit me in the calf of the leg, and I immediately, reached down to see if I still had one, but it was there.
Yeah.
But we were knocked. It felt like we hit a brick wall. It's actually what it felt like. It stopped it.
Yeah.
And of course we were knocked out of formation, and with the 2 engines on, one on the left side and one on the right, the plane was in a kind of circling position, not a spin, but it was getting close to going into a spin. But the main thing was it was on fire. It was from the and particularly, it was on the right side, and that's where I was flying that particular day.
Mm-hmm.
The intercom was knocked out. I couldn't communicate with the crew members, but we had a standard operating procedure. If the plane's on fire, you leave, and they left.
Mm-hmm.
But
so everybody knew to bail out at that point because
right.
of the fire. Okay.
It was on fire, and now it took both pilots to get on the wheel and try to maintain some stability
mm-hmm.
for the crew to get out.
Right.
And the bombardier, the top turret gunner went down in the nose with the navigator, and they got the bombardier's body out of the plane. But we had pre-flighted this plane the day before, but we didn't check the escape hatches. Normally, you don't check escape hatches. They're like parachutes. You expect them to work
mm-hmm.
when you need them. If they don't, they have a little note in there. If you bring it back, we'll give you another one. Kind of. But anyway, when I went down the nose, I was surprised that the navigator was still there, and he was still pulling on this release on the escape hatch. And I stood there a while, and of course I never really expected to get out. That is, not alive, because I'd seen too many airplanes. When the gas tank explodes, I mean they're gone. But
right.
So I motioned for him to leave, but he was still tugging on that thread. So I just fell kind of head first, right on that door, and as I went out, the door came off, because the door and I went rolling down the fuselage, and at that point I realized I didn't have my parachute harness fastened, so I had to get busy to get, because else if I had pulled my ripcord, I had been, we wore the parachute harness during the mission, and it had a buckle up here, and then the 2 leg straps. So during my free fall, I fastened my.
Okay, but you had it on, but you didn't have all the harness fastened,
yeah.
And so you can't pull the ripcord without everything fastened.
Well, I could pull the ripcord, but what would happen when the parachute opened, it would just just take the harness and leave me.
It would have just floated away from you and
Yeah.
let you fall. Well, so if you were free falling for several thousand feet, I guess you were going down faster
Oh, yeah.
than the other people that were bailing out, right?
That's true.
So, and you said there were a lot of clouds or contrails, so you just kind of
Well,
dropped out of sight, or?
no, at that point, there was a layer of clouds, but they were below 10,000 feet. I judged they were probably more like 6,000 or 8,000 feet. They were low clouds. Now we're talking about, March,
Mm-hmm.
and the weather was beginning to improve some.
Right.
But I judged 8,000 to 10,000 feet, and the rate of acceleration is 32 feet per second. You pick up a little speed, and
Right.
when I pulled my rip, I was amazed how you could control your body during this fall. Of course, we see it now with these skydivers and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like being in water,
Mm-hmm.
the way. And I got myself in a position where I was, this was a chest pack I was wearing, where I was in about almost a 45-degree angle.
Mm-hmm.
And you pull the ripcord, and a little pilot chute about 2.5, 3 feet in diameter comes out,
Mm-hmm.
and it in turn inflates, and then it pulls the main chute, which is a 28-foot canopy.
Right. Okay.
But anyway, when that big chute opened, it felt like I went back up in the air about 50 feet,
Yeah.
because it was quite a joke.
Yeah.
And I was still above the cloud layer, and I looked, and all of the parachutes were quite a distance from me, and very much higher.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to count them because I was concerned about not only the navigator but also the other pilot, because
Mm-hmm.
he was behind me when I went out,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly when I only counted seven chutes. But then later, when I was in interrogation camp, and right when I first got to Camp Lucky Strike down at La Havre, I ran into the navigator, and as they were leaving to come back to the States, the top turret gunners had inadvertently pulled the ripcord on his parachute before he bailed out, and we carried extra parachutes, but he grabbed the chute up and went out, and it failed to open. Of course, I got that first information from the interrogation officer at not Gestapo, but in the Luftwaffe interrogation camp.
Mm-hmm. So when you hit the ground, then none of the other people are around you.
I never saw any of them.
Okay.
I saw two. They were two German airplanes that were circling me as I.
So they were
I
looking to
approached
see
them.
where you and the others.
So they knew
came
where I landed. We were trained. Well, I say trained, but to try to, of course, even in all of our training, it wasn't unusual for to cut the gas off. You'd have to look for a place to land, But and of course, in this stage, the object was to find a place to hide,
Mm-hmm.
So as I came through those clouds, and the clouds are fairly low, I saw this big woods, a forest, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed to me like it was 5 or 6 miles away. I thought, boy, if I can make it to there, I should have it made. But like I said before, this was March, and there was a stiff wind blowing, and luckily it was blowing toward the woods,
Okay.
and it carried me. There's no really sensation of falling, or it wasn't for me in that parachute, until you get close to the ground, and then it looks like the ground just comes up and bams you real hard, But anyway, I kept drifting toward that woods, and I thought, gosh, I'm going to land in the edge of that thing and get hung up in one of them trees and be up there. But luckily, I crossed my fingers, said a little prayer, and then luckily I came down right between some scattered trees, hit the ground like a ton of brick, and my left leg that had caught the shrapnel was it didn't do it any good, but
Yeah.
but I grabbed the parachute, dumped the air out of it so it wouldn't drag me, and just rolled it up in my arm and then took off for the dark, thick forest. And on the way, I came across an old hollow stump. I put the parachute in it, covered it with some leaves, and then I was, as I said, I just kept going until I heard.
Did you have any kind of beacon or anything where anybody searching for you could have pinpointed your position? There wasn't anything like that. So you just on your own.
Actually, we were given escape provisions, water purifiers and D-bars and different and little medical kit and things like that. But back in those days, that was before the days of plastic, and they had these in cardboard boxes which they had dipped in paraffin. And you wear those things. Of course, the flight coveralls had pockets everywhere. In the first few missions, I had those in my flight coveralls, but they'd wear a blister on you.
Right.
So usually, and also we had flak suits and we had helmets and that sort of thing. And a 45 coat. But I hung the 45 coat on the seat, on the back of the seat of the airplane, and I put all this other stuff under the seat. And when time came to leave, and I, as I said before, I never expected to get out.
So you didn't grab all that up?
No, and I was on the ground for, I don't know, several hours before I realized that I had really the most important thing to me. It was a packet that had a map of Western Europe and some French currency, and I had that in my flight coveralls. But again, like I said, I didn't really know that I had that until I'd been on the ground for a while, because the map was the most important.
So did you hide in the woods until dark, and then start walking, or what did you do?
Well, I hadn't been in there too long till I could hear voices and I could hear dogs barking. Now it may have been my imagination, but since they knew where I landed, I assumed that they were making an effort to catch me. And this was a marsh area, swampy area. There was water. I waded water almost up to my knees, and then I got out of the water. I managed to kind of, being raised on the farm and playing in the woods and everything. We climbed trees, and so I managed to get up this tree, and I don't thinking maybe that if they were trying to trail me, the two of them together. In fact, I was in that tree when the 8th Air Force came over me going back home. That's when I really had the lonely feeling.
Right, because everybody else had completed the mission, were heading back, and here you were up in a tree and somewhere in France.
Oh yeah,
with dogs barking.
And I wasn't too sure that I wasn't in Germany at that point, because we were. In fact, the first notification that my parents got, they reported that I was shot down in Germany.
Now, were you reported missing in action or killed in action?
Well, anytime that you lose like an aircraft, unless there's definite proof you're reported missing in action.
Okay.
And you're reported missing in action until, well, the word comes, that you've either been killed or you've been taken a prisoner.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, of course, I still don't really understand, because I was under the impression that you had to be missing at least 6 months before you reported killed in action. Of course, I was missing. I was shot down in March, and I think it was in August when I was reported missing in action.
Mm-hmm.
I have a theory of what happened, but I don't know whether we need to go into it or not. But anyway, and it was almost November when I got to the regular prisoner of war camp, Stalag 1 up in northern or northeastern Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Sign said Sweden 60 miles, but it failed to point out you had to go across the Baltic to get there.
Just wasn't by land.
No.
Well, let's go back to in the woods in France. So did you make your way to a house or something, or what did you? I mean, you had to be getting hungry if you hadn't had those rations.
I don't actually remember getting. I was going on nervous energy, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyway, I spent the night in the woods, and I got to a dry place and some leaves, and then I had compasses. I did have compasses with me, and I picked me a southeastern or southwestern heading, and I. Knowing from there that this was a fairly large area, I think it was actually part of the Marne Forest.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But it was the next day before I got out of the woods, and then I found this stock beet pit where they dig a hole and line it with straw and then put beets in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They must. I don't know. I tried to eat some of them, but they sure didn't go down very good. But I stayed there all night. Well, and early the next morning, before sunup, I got out and I got in a straw stack, or where they had stacked. I think it was barley. They had the heads inside and the butts outside. But I got in there, and there was several Frenchmen came and they had cows. Some of them had cows. Some of them had horses. Some of them horses and cows. They strung them out 3 in a row, and one drove and one held the plow, and they were plowing in this field. Mm-hmm. There was a dog there, and he came up to that straw stack. I had an idea what he had in mind, but then he got a whiff of me, and he started barking. Uh-huh. And I thought, boy, we were told not to approach a group of Frenchmen, although 95% of them would be sympathetic to your cause. Right. They couldn't take a chance on being turned in. Because there was a price on our heads by the Germans, and the penalty for a Frenchman aiding you was almost in most cases was their life. So, it was. But anyway, I waited there all day until they were leaving, and I waited till he got down to the last person, and I came out of that straw stack like to frighten him. And he told me that he would bring me food and water, but he never showed up. So the next morning, that was Saturday. By the way, my mission the day of my mission was on a Thursday. Okay. So the next morning, I again got out early, and these people lived in little villages, and they farmed outside, and their houses and barns were all connected to each
Rather
other.
than spread out, they're all right in there.
Oh yeah,
close.
and
Okay.
just all in a row down through there. Well, I climbed over this pretty tall, I guess it was 8 foot high wooden board fence, and I went over that fence. Well, I found a place where there was some brick piled up, and was able to get over it. And there were some cows there. I milked some milk out of my hand, and
Kept it in your hand.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was never real fond of right out of the faucet, but anyway. But and then I kept waiting, and no one there was stirring around there. I should have waited longer, but I got a little impatient, and I walked up this back the door, to the back, and I knocked on the door, and I heard some grumbling in there, and the guy and whoever was in there, he went to the door that led out to the street, and he hollered a time or two, and he went back, and I knocked again, and the next time he went out there, I thought he was going to wake up the whole village. He was really upset, and I got cold feet, and I took off for that fence, and just as I went over the fence, I looked back, and he was standing in the doorway.
So he'd seen you.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I didn't. But I did find a horse, some kind of a concrete trough out. Which I know you're not supposed to drink the water over there, but I took a chance on it.
Mm-hmm.
But the strange thing was I saw this windmill, used to be common here to pump water.
Right.
And it was just blowing away in that March wind. And it was kind of in the middle of a field, and I went up there, and the windmill its propeller was running, but it wasn't connected to any pump or anything. And I looked down there, and I could see the water wasn't but 3 or 4 feet down there, but I didn't have anything to get it with. And while I was sitting there looking, this Frenchman walked right up on me, like scared me to death too. But he was apparently, this was on Sunday. He was apparently on his way to work someplace, and he had this thermos of hot coffee. In fact, it like the scalding, because you're thirsty. And then he had a little metal pan that had some scrambled eggs with pieces of fat pork in it. So he gave, that was the first food that I'd had
Since Thursday, and this is now
early
Sunday.
Thursday morning before the
Right,
briefing, like maybe something like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But and then I encountered other Frenchmen that was again promised they're going to. The thing that I wanted to do was get out of that uniform. It was kind of conspicuous running around with a uniform on. But they didn't pan out. Finally, I ran upon 3 people, and I knew that was kind of against the rule. But I approached them, and they pointed out a house to me in this little village, and they said something to me that sounded like mayor. I don't really know what they. I didn't understand the language, but the closer I got to it, the more suspicious I became, because there was a lot of traffic in and out there, and most of it was German. So I went in this barn up in the loft, and there was cracks in cracks between the boards.
Right.
And I sat there and observed what was going on, and it was and I fell asleep of all things, but I was awakened by this voice, and I looked down, and there was a young fellow. I would think he was probably 15 years old or so. He had this horse with a ground slide, if you know what a ground slide.
I do.
And he was putting hay on that ground slide, but he was stacking it all up the same way. And when the horse would start to move, it'd all fall off. He did. I sat there and watched it do it 3 times. So I just slid off, and again I put the fear in him too. But And I stacked it on there, and we just leisurely walked up to the house. Again, the house was, I don't know, maybe 100 yards or so.
Mm-hmm.
But when we got to the house, there were two men there, and boy, they grabbed me in a hurry and pulled me back into a porch-like thing.
Mm-hmm. Got you out of sight from the street.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
okay.
Because as I said, I was,
Still in the uniform.
yeah. So I was real thirsty, and I made motions.
Mm-hmm.
So they came out with this pitcher and a glass, and apparently it was beer. It was the bitter stuff ever I put in. This guy, I think, was from Holland. And I like to never made them understand. There was a hand pump out in the courtyard there. So I started making motions of pumping, and they looked at each other kind of quizzical and think, what, below, water, So but first they first went in and brought out a bigger pitcher and a bigger glass, but it was the same thing I had before. But I finally, and then I traded my old leather flight jacket for an old, what we used to call overall jacket, a blue denim thing, and my dress trousers, pink trousers, for a pair of patched on top of patch of, again, blue denim.
Mm-hmm.
But I still had my shirt, the green shirt, that dress shirt. And so they took me down to they also fed me, but they took me down the barn, and they got out there early the next morning, early before sun ever came up. They wanted me out of there before daylight, and I was feeling pretty good about myself, here. So I just was walking down the road,
Okay.
and it was early in the morning. It was misty, kind of misty, raining, and I met this man on a bicycle. He had this kind of a cape-like on. He had this little hat that looked like what Western Union delivery boys used to wear. Actually, he was a French policeman, a gendarme.
Okay.
But I didn't know that. But anyway, I met him. He said something to me, and I just act like I didn't hear him and just kept walking.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been good morning or whatever. I don't know.
Right.
But anyway, he went down. He passed me, and then he went, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 feet. And he stopped, and he came back.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me, I remember him asked me if I was Deutsch. Of course, that's German. And my father's family was Pennsylvania, always claimed Pennsylvania Dutch. I said, well, I know when I open my mouth, he's going to know I'm not French. So I said yeah or something. I guess it may have said or yes, but anyway, he starts to search me, and he sees that shirt, and he says military. And then he pats me up on the chest, and I have a New Testament that has one of those metal bikes on it, supposed to. And boy, and he felt that. He threw that old cape back, and he had a Luger in there about a foot long. Looked at me like. So he pulled that on me, and then he got the New Testament out, and the first thing, the next thing, he says English, and I said American, and I start flapping my wings like a big bird.
Because I know you're a pilot, yeah.
And it was always strange to the German free forces or the underground that he let me go, because they always considered them collaborators. But I never forget. He looked up and down the road, and there was no one coming, and he made me to understand that I should get off the road and go cross country. But he said, alley, get going.
Right.
And I went.
Right. So you went, okay, and off the road and into the field.
Yeah.
Okay, so then where did that take you?
Well, I ran into another Frenchman, and he took me and fed me, and first time I'd ever looked at, had seen myself in a mirror, and of course let's see, we were getting along. It's been about a week,
Mm-hmm.
and my beard's grown out, and man, I am scratched and all messed up where I've been through them bushes and brambles,
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, I look like the wild man from Borneo. So he gave me a razor, and I took a bath, cleaned up, and I know he gave me some of this summer sausage, that French bread that you stick under your arm,
Mm-hmm.
And then I went on my way, and I ran up on another guy that was plowing out in the field, and he was he took me into his he was a farmer, of course, and he had a nice farm. They had some cattle and different things, and we had as best we could. I think he had a French-English dictionary that we used, and knowing that when he found out that I came off the farm, and I stayed at his house actually for two, 3 nights, and I don't believe even his wife knew I was there. I know the lady that took care of the house didn't know. I often wondered what she thought was happening to all that food. But that was the first bed that I'd slept in, and it was a real comfortable bed, and I stayed up in that room all day, and then after night, he and I we'd even go out to the barn and look around. But word came that they were doing a house-to-house search, and he took me back out and took me out in the woods, not the one I was in originally.
Right.
And in the middle of the night, two other Frenchmen showed up with riding bicycles. And one of them gave me his bicycle, and the other one took off. He made me understand that he didn't want me too close to him, but
Right.
but I followed him. And if of course, I wasn't very good at riding bicycles, but if he got too far away ahead of me, he would stop and let me catch up.
Get closer,
And we came into a railroad track, and he got across, and the train came along, but I sat there and waited, and he was waiting down the road. So we went into another village, and I stayed I was in 3 or 4 different houses there over different times, because when the Germans would start searching and went in, they'd move me to the other one. It was there that I really was contacted with the heads of the Free French Forces or French Underground. They supposedly came from Paris. And they started questioning me and asking me some of these things, military questions that I was a little dubious of, but they too pulled a gun. They thought maybe, and the Germans, I guess, had tried to plant informants to break up their organization. But I saw that they were real, so I gave them the information that they wanted. And to this day, I only have one dog tag, because they took one. Said they have it they were going back to Paris, and they were going to verify. And shortly after that, this gentleman from down at Troyes, or what they call Troyes, on the Aube River, had he picked up and dead livestock is about what he did. You had to have, the only way you could have a truck or anything is you had to have some kind of business that justified it.
Right.
And it was and they didn't have fuel; they burned coke,
Yeah.
so it didn't have too much power. But anyway, we drove several miles, and it was kind of strange, because when this first first Frenchman I ran into that I got the clothes from, he tried to teach me a few French words.
Right.
If I got stopped, I was supposed to tell him I was going toi, to travailler, or something like that. It would mean to work, I guess. But anyway, I did end up at toi.
Okay.
And I was there with this Frenchman. His name was Marcel Doré, D-O-R-E with
Mark. Okay.
yeah. And he had a wife. He had 3 children.
So you were there. How did the Germans get onto you?
Well, I was there for about 10 days, and then they brought 3 other airmen, a pilot, and two gunners, 2 enlisted men.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they were shot down the same day that I was.
Okay.
But but from a different outfit. I didn't know them. But anyway, and we were there, and after about a week, we were supposed to have been flown to North Africa. In fact, we had put a little beret on. We had a bottle of champagne, and I was carrying more messages than a carrier pigeon, to not only to North Africa but to London for the
French,
Free
French, yeah.
And we were waiting to be picked up, and the local head of the organization came in, and he was real depressed. He said that they had word that the Germans had spotted the field that the airplane was going to land in and had it staked out, and they had to abort the thing. And actually had that gone through, I would have been back, and I would have been back to England in less than probably three weeks.
Yeah.
After being shot down. And after that, they said, we would just. They had tried to get some airmen into Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't too awfully for Switzerland, but they had gotten caught, and it had riddled their organization pretty badly, and they weren't going to attempt that anymore. Most of them went in through Spain, through the Pyrenees into Spain. But they said we wouldn't until. Actually, how come? Then they were the British. The thing that really started the whole thing was the British bombed a tank, a German tank. I don't know, a training ground or something. It was about 20 kilometers, 12 miles or so from where we were, and of course the British bombed at night, and that was the biggest fireworks I've ever witnessed. They come over and with radar ships and drop flares to mark the target, and then they just saturate it, one plane at a time. In the process, they lost 48 airplanes, and so that caused an influx of not only Gestapo but any kind of an infiltrator that they could get, and we ended up with two of those airmen. And then, just shortly after that, there was a P-51 pilot that was doing a strafing mission. Well, he dropped his bomb, then he went back to strafe this airfield, a little further away, but by the way, he was on his so-called last mission. He didn't, he was going to be rotated home after he got back.
To the States,
and he got hit by an aircraft and bailed out, and so there were 7 of us there, which was more than, there were really too many. It's hard to
in this one house.
hard to hide that many. On top of that, the pilot of this two Englishmen we had was a New Zealander, and he had been badly burned. I only saw him once, and that was when after I was captured and taken to this jail in Troyes.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you could see was his head was just holes where his eyes, nose, and mouth was. I don't know whether the Frenchmen ever fooled with him, because in the process they not only caught the Marcel, the Frenchman I was with, they picked up about 14 or 15 Frenchmen in the deal, including the doctor that had doctored the pilot and the ambulance people.
So did some of them tell where you seven were? Or?
Yeah, it came through. I mean, that was the, and we were suspicious, particularly I was, when these two men showed up with all these rusty guns and all this other stuff, trying to show they were part of the French free forces, and they were going to move us out. Now this was again in May. See, they were going to move us immediately to south of France and into Spain. When we'd been told, we'd stay. Cause everyone knew that the invasion was imminent. Just the time was the thing that was a factor. But they were the ones that they had gotten information through a third party about this from this people that was harboring the New Zealander, and so they were the ones, because they were there. They were there the night they picked us up, or made the raid. They didn't.
So tell me about that night. Did you all have much warning that, or just all of a sudden somebody looked out the window and you're surrounded by Germans, or what?
It was almost that bad, Danny. I tell you, we were eating our evening meal, which the French serve by courses, and takes a while. And some of my fellow complained about having all this meat and no potatoes, and vice versa. But anyway, we were at the table, and we had just started. Actually, I think we had maybe the cold cuts and salad and soup, and we hadn't gotten to the main course, I'll put it that way. And all of a sudden, I looked out, and this house was back off of the paved road, a little distance, not too far, but it was just a cloud of dust, is what it was. And they were I believe six cars with Gestapo in it. They came in these two traders guys, and they just went around that. They just went around that house and surrounded it. But then out of that dust appeared, there must have been at least 200 or 300 of these German soldiers that was. There was a contingent of German soldiers guarding a power plant or a substation, just a quarter of a mile. In fact, the first morning I woke up in that place and I saw those barrage balloons flying over the house. I wondered what was going on, But anyway, and they were actually coming in the door before we realized what was happening.
Oh, yeah.
I happened to be sitting with my back to the door to the basement, and I was first one down the steps, and there was a wide set of steps going to double doors where they bring their barrels of wine and whatnot down, And up that step off to the left, there was a concrete porch that had space. I guess it was probably 15, 18 inches from the dirt to the
where the
concrete was.
Concrete was, yeah.
And there was just a small hole there. It wasn't a whole lot larger than that. I would say 14 by 16, 18 inches.
But enough room to crawl through.
It went in under that porch.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in there, and then this, actually he was a boy from East St. Louis. He came in, and he came in there, and then the Germans were already coming down in the basement, and this red-headed Englishman he stuck his head in there, you know.
Okay.
So we just, luckily I was on one side, he was on, we just got him by the arm, down the armpits, and just pulled him in, you know.
So now there's three of you packed into this
And we've
little
got three
small...
of them. As far as width, after you get through that hole, I mean, it's, I'd say, at least 8 feet wide, and it goes back probably 20 feet or better.
Well, did you have any way to cover that hole, or did you crawl away from it so if somebody looked through, they wouldn't see you? Or?
There was a ventilation pipe about, I'd say it was at least 10 feet further into the thing. And eventually, after things quieted down that night, and there was just there was room that you could go over the top of it, and that's where we ended up at, behind that, so they couldn't look in there and actually see us.
I see. Okay.
But what I guess you would call her a maid. She was one of the two girls that helped Mrs. Madame Dore to, you know, they did the serving and that sort of thing. But anyway, she had come down in there after the Germans had, they were still Germans in the house, but they had dozed off or something, and brought food.
Okay.
And we
So
had
first search, they didn't find you, and now she's bringing you food.
Yeah,
But there's still Germans in
and
the
we
house,
had
okay.
we were still up in that forepart of that, and when we finished the food, it was dirt there, you know. We covered the plate up with dirt and left it in there. In fact, I was wanting to leave. I was wanting to get out, but she told me that the old outdoors was lit up because they had set there'd been some timber they'd cut off, and they'd brush piles out there, and they'd set those on fire. They thought she had told them that we had gotten outside. So they were searching outside for us.
Okay.
Besides, they were tearing the house apart, stairwells and closets, trying to, thought we were in some kind of secret compartments or something. But anyway, she said no, that, you know, that it would, the way the situation was, you know, I wouldn't be able to get out. Besides, we could hear these soldiers in the hobnails boots they wore walking. They were walking around the house.
So it wasn't really anywhere to run to.
No, but I did go up. I went upstairs, and I got my map, you know, that I had, and I got one thing I remember getting was a deck of cards for some reason. But anyway, and this German major was up there in a, you know, big easy chair, and he was snoring away.
So you just kind of tiptoed right past him, huh?
I just went by him and
Never woke up.
got
Yeah.
what I
Okay.
got.
Well, what finally tipped them off to where you all were behind that porch?
Well, I hate to keep picking on this red-headed Englishman, but he's not among my favorite people. But during the night, he got a call from nature,
Right.
to put it mildly.
So he felt he had to go.
He had to go, and instead of going back in the other part of the basement, he got right outside of that opening on the step.
Okay.
And like a cat, he poured dirt on it. But it was the next day, Danny, and they weren't even any guards there. What they did, they came back with their trucks and whatnot, and they were looting the place. They were taking, and then they got down to the basement, and this man, he'd been engaged in the black markets, you know, stuff, and he had things that other people didn't have, including all kinds of wines and just walls of champagne. And
so they're looking all
they
through
were
the basement.
they were hauling it out.
Hauling it out.
They were hauling it out. See, up through these double doors. And this, of all people, this Gestapo major happened to step wrong, and
so he'd had this bowel movement right by the steps.
Right.
And the excrement was just right there where they were walking.
And I heard him grumbling and carrying on and scraping his foot, and then things quietened down. But it wasn't just a matter of a few minutes until they had lights shined back in there and had 2 machine guns and a couple of rifles, and of course all these Gestapo officers carried sidearms. So
but they couldn't see you because of the
they
pipe.
couldn't see us, no. But when they started to holler Das ist alles or Finney or they didn't. To my knowledge, I don't remember saying anything in English, but anyway, they finally, this Englishman, he had a yellow streak down his back, foot wide, and he yelled out, you know, we're coming. And of course, I knew it was futile to try to, you know, they would start spraying that thing with machine gun fire, and even though you were behind that thing, you didn't know. It wasn't much. The jig was up.
Yeah, so you all came out and surrendered after he.
And this was actually the first raid on the house was on May the 12th, and this was in the afternoon, late in the afternoon of the 13th. And that, I tell you, that major was one pleased person, because he was going to have to have a whole lot of explaining to do if he didn't find us, you know. But,
and then human nature and human frailty betrayed you there. And so where'd they take you after that?
They took us into this Troyes, and they put us in the jail with these Frenchmen that they had picked up. It was a big, just a big square holding pen like thing. No blankets, no covers, no nothing. There was about 18 or 20 of us, and we just slept on the floor like a bunch of hogs. Maybe try to cushion your head to someone's leg, you know. It was luckily a wooden floor. And surprised it may sound wood softer than concrete.
Yeah.
But as I found out.
Yeah.
But then they kept us in there. They kept the 3 of us in there overnight, and then they moved us into another area where they had the 4 other airmen that was with us. Plus that's where I saw the New Zealander, and they had kind of a nice, spacious area with cots and that sort of thing. And we stayed there. Let's see, 14th. On the 17th, they moved us to Paris, and that's where we went. That's when we went to Gestapo headquarters.
Okay. Well, now, once you were there, I guess they started interrogating you, didn't they? Or
you mean in when we were in jail in Troyes?
Well, I don't know about there, but
well,
I figured
we did
they
in Paris.
did. In
yeah.
Paris, they certainly would.
Yeah, we
were
went
at the
to
headquarters.
We went to Gestapo headquarters, you know, and we got the ultimatum: you talk or you die, you know, or what.
Yeah.
And but they put us in a jail there, and it was supposedly the biggest jail in France. It was a 5-story building. I don't know how many cell blocks, how many closed doors locked between where they took us in and where we eventually ended on the 5th floor. a fairly, at least compared to some other places, modern thing. And in other words, it had plumbing and that sort of.
I see.
In fact, we could talk. We could talk. There was an Englishman in the dungeon or the basement of the place that was actually condemned for espionage, and we could even talk to him.
I see.
Actually, we thought things were bad, but things wasn't really too bad.
Well, what did they do? I mean, I assume you all gave your name, rank, and serial number, and were reluctant to say anything else. So, were you all beaten or
not there?
Okay.
In fact, I was called out. I don't know how many others. To talk to this, what they said. Now, what they say and what's true, it was kind of a cloudy area to me. Represented the International Red Cross, and his advice was like some of the other people that, you're a young man. You've got your life to live. What you need to do is to give them the information they're asking for, so you can get on with their life.
Well, you weren't sure whether that guy was Red Cross or not.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
No, I took it that he wasn't, but he could have been, but I didn't. I just didn't believe him as they pulled a lot of other stunts like that. So even some they claimed to be American citizens. But they had a full book of tricks.
Right.
But we actually wasn't questioned that much there. We thought that was part of our punishment of having been. There wasn't any question that we were caught in enemy territory in civilian clothes, and except for our shoes and underwear, but outer clothing, But they put three of us in a cell, and I was surprised that this New Testament that I talked about earlier, they didn't even take that.
Oh, no. Huh.
Because I was in a cell with a kid from Wales, in England, and this young boy from East St. Louis who was Catholic, and the Wales was Church of England, and we took turns reading from this. Well, it had the Psalms and New Testament, aloud, and then discussed it and that sort of thing. And I realized that it wasn't as much difference in, at least from actually an uneducated standpoint, in the beliefs as maybe we'd been led to believe or something. Right. But anyway, it was rather, and they even brought some. There were some English books and that sort of thing. And the food, although it wasn't the best in the world, it was ample, and it wasn't. We just thought we were paying the 30 days that you get for, and it actually was about 30 days. But in that 30 days, the D-Day occurred, and the bombs started falling around.
So you're in that jail in Paris, and that's not that far from Normandy and Omaha Beach. And all that.
And of course there's almost a continuum. In fact, there are 20 air raids alarmed over a 24-hour period, and they're bombing railroad yards, canal bridges, even on the Seine there.
So did you all figure out that probably this was the invasion?
Oh yeah, we figured that was the prelude at least, but the Germans would put when they sound the air raid alarm, they'd put the double lock on the door, and they'd take off for the air raid shelters. And that building, it swayed. You couldn't stand up. You even sitting down, you couldn't. The only way you could just spread eagle on the floor, because it was swaying at least 2 feet. But
from all the detonations.
Yeah, particularly the heavy bombardment, like in the marshalling yards. Now some of those smaller bombs that went off like on bridges and that sort of thing.
Well, of course,
Rocket.
D-Day was successful, as we all know, so you've now got Allied troops on the continent. So
Wow.
did they move you all
So
further
they moved
inland?
us out, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, on about, I think around the 17th of June, they handcuffed, although in this prison, whenever they would open the doors for anything, particularly about to feed us, they always had two troops with machine guns in the balcony facing you.
Mm-hmm.
To I don't know what they thought we was going to do, but anyway, when they took us out, they handcuffed three of us together.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to be the unlucky person that was in the middle, and they never took the handcuffs off of us. They put us in on a rail, it was a coach train,
Mm-hmm.
a compartment line
Okay.
thing. There was supposed to hold 6 people, of course, and they put the 6 of us, and then they had 2 Gestapo agents right in the same seat with us, and then they had a soldier with he was a Gestapo with a machine gun standing in the doorway,
Mm-hmm.
and they had 2 just regular Wehrmacht or German soldiers stationed at each end of the train with rifles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think John Dillinger had that sort of escort, but they kept the handcuffs on us even when.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they never fed us, but even go to the bathroom, they never moved. But when we pulled into Frankfurt, they took us to Frankfurt.
So they went from Paris, France to Frankfurt, Germany
Right.
on this train. Okay.
We pulled into this, I'm sure at one time it had been a beautiful edifice, or the only thing left was the marble floors.
Mm-hmm.
They unloaded us, and we waited there for a while, and this local populace, the civilians, they taunted us, they spit on us, they threw rocks at us.
Mm-hmm.
So finally they put us in this truck, the back of this truck with a tarp over it.
Mm-hmm.
The tarp had slits, had tears in it, and we thought that they were trying to keep the Germans from population from harming us, but we went. They took us to this. I guess it's best described as a political prison. I'm sure they had, because they had practically all nationalities in there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what we could see out of that truck, I never saw one intact window. In fact, wasn't a whole lot of buildings still standing in certain areas, because Frankfurt
From
was
all the
hit.
bombing, yeah.
Frankfurt was hit pretty hard. Luckily, I was never on a mission. I was supposed to make one, but CQ didn't wake me up. But anyway, and I was asked that question several times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever bombed Frankfurt? But anyway, we went into this place, and they had this. These inmates were head shaved. They wore striped uniforms with wooden shoes, and they had about 10 or 12 of them pulling a 2-wheel cart that had just grass clippings on it. One of my comrades, we thought we'd just been held there temporary at this time,
Mm-hmm.
until we could go to. We knew that Wetzlar, which was where the Luftwaffe interrogation center was, near Frankfurt. So we thought that's where we were headed,
Yeah.
But anyway,
Okay.
he hollers, "What's that? Grass for the soup?" And when they finally got around to feeding us, that's exactly what it was.
Oh, really? That's what
Oh,
they
yeah.
fed you, was
Yeah.
grass
The
clippings.
grass wasn't too
And-
bad, but the wheat straw, barley straw, and dirt was left in the bottom of the bowl.
Oh, my goodness.
But anyway, they, without warning, they came
So
in.
they just dumped all that into some water and heated it up,
Right.
and that was the rations.
Yeah, when they got ready, after, I don't know what the Gestapo and the prison officials were conferring. Just out of the blue, they came, two of them up in that truck. They were grabbing us and throwing us out of there like we were sacks of wheat or something. And they just rabbit punched you and poke you in the ribs with them big old keys, and they put us in a room, and this red-headed Englishman again, he goes berserk. He says they're going to kill us, and the door opens and two of these guys come in. Of course, everybody, kind of wants to get as far away as possible. They come down and they just literally drag them out, and I said, oh, this is not going to work. We get up here by the door, and when they open that door, just get out there before they have time to, And one of this, well, actually, the first one they got was this boy from East St. Louis. I never knew whether he did it purposely, but he was going out, leaving, and he had his clothes up in his arms, and he dropped them. And I don't know to say whether he did it deliberately or not, but at least we could see that he at that point was still living, But basically, what they did, they took us back, and we did have to strip down, and they had people that went through our clothes, every seam, and then I thought at first, well, they're going to give us some medical exam, because they run their hand through your hair. They looked in your ears. You had to look in your mouth and all the other openings you had.